Hi. Before going to video, please subscribe to my channel for more interesting stuff. And the question is, people of Reddit who have practiced or witnessed acts of the witchcraft, voodoo, or the occult, what was the strangest / most unexplainable thing you saw? NSFW.
Not sure if this counts, but when I was in high school I had this sudden bout of nightmares and sleep paralysis. I wasn't going through a stressful time or anything and I don't freak out easily. I grew up watching 80s and 90s horror films and I normally sleep with total darkness and doors closed. These nightmares were super sudden and happened almost every night. It was constant sleep paralysis where my room was on fire, or there were bats thrashing around above me, or there was a figure hovering over my body and I couldn't breathe, the classic. Sometimes my speakers let out strange frequency type sounds even when it was switched off. Things would fall off my shelves, etc. My mom would always find me sleeping on the couch the next morning with the TV on because it was so crazy. Suddenly it all stopped, and when I told my mom, she admitted that she had sought advice from a priestess who engraved a blessing for me on a silver pendant and instructed my mom to place it in my room. She didn't want to tell me to see if it would work. I've never had such episodes since. This is a pretty mundane story, but I feel it captures something of what real magic might be like. I used to work in an occult bookstore. We sold mostly psychic nonsense and spiritualist new agey stuff. But there was a bookcase in the back with the real expensive stuff. And the owner was this real old, real wise man. This woman used to come in when I was working and she'd just talk. For ages and ages. It was a non-stop stream of bullshit. She knew this, she did that, did you know about this, on and on. She'd suck up a ton of time. If you've ever heard the term energy vampire, it would apply here. When she left you'd just feel drained. One day she comes in while the owner is there. She walks up to the counter and starts her shtick and he's very polite, and listening, but she just sort of runs out of steam. Like, within 60 seconds. She hums and haws a bit and then walks out of the store. It would usually take me an hour to get rid of her and he shut her down in a minute flat, with a smile on his face. I mention it to him and he says, there's a circle of protection painted onto the floor for a reason. I'm not a religious person and if anything only believe in doing good and honoring whatever positive energy there is. What happened to me still makes me feel like surely someone was pranking me. I'm not even sure how to share this story, it still freaks me out. I want to as a logical person believe there's no God, or at the very least no such thing as evil spirits, and this has always shaken me enough to question it. I've only ever told this story to my brother. When I was in high school I dated a guy who, to be frank, was always an asshole. But towards the end of our relationship started worshipping Satan. One night while on the phone, this was before cell phones, he said he sent something to pay me a visit that night. Not taking him seriously at all, I laughed like, yeah okay, whatever. We hung up the phone, I fell asleep. In the middle of the night, while asleep, I started feeling the worst stomach cramps I've ever had. Tossing and turning, waking up and trying to go back to sleep, it would not go away unless I opened my eyes and sat up. I settled, trying to sleep, and there was a whisper. It sounded like a man's voice, hey. It was right in my ear. I opened my eyes, looked around, nothing. Closed my eyes again, drifted off, and again felt cramping to the point of sickness in my stomach as another whisper sounded, wake up. I sat up, the sick feeling stopped. At this point I'm fully freaked out. The whispers sounded like someone hovering over me. I pulled the covers over my head and just tried to lay still and pretend I didn't exist and that shit didn't just happen. Minutes went by and I thought everything was fine, then suddenly tapping started in my room, like someone was walking though and smacking things randomly. I'm not even ashamed to admit that I bolted from my bed, and ripped my bedroom door open and ran out. These stories remind me of my youth. I once met one guy on the internet, who practiced stuff. Before we ever met, I told him to make a summoning circle, like the ones you do when trying to reach a deceased person, but to reach me instead of someone deceased. At that time, I was quite delusional about my body. I considered my chest narrow and fat, but everyone else would say I'm very broad, strong and muscular, but we only had each other's close-up face selfies. No way to see the body types. So he made the summoning circle and tried to summon me, but it didn't seem to work. Then we both went to sleep. The next morning, he said he had a dream about me, and told me that he saw me looking very strong and muscular with broad shoulders. But I also had a dream, where I saw him. He was very skinny. Then we met in real life to verify that. I was exactly like in his dream, he was exactly like in my dream. He even had the same scent about him. My sister was / is really into occult / Wiccan / witchcraft kind of stuff. I think she meant to be Wiccan, But a 13-year-old isn't incredibly discerning. Around the time she got into it, our house started to get incredibly creepy. We would see things move out of the corner of our eyes. Nobody wanted to be home alone. Nobody wanted to be in the living room at night. At first, we could blame it on the house and the land. Then we moved, not just houses, but continents. The weird stuff followed. All of it was always centered around my sister and her room, and it was always aggravated when we did serious cleaning and especially when we moved. The height of it was when we were moving back to the US. We had 2 different flight groups. My mom and sister left 6 weeks before the rest of us to pick the new house while my dad, brother and I cleaned and packed at the old house. We heard thumping from my sister's room. The windows and doors would open and close on their own, not possible from just the wind, and shadows would move wildly under the door pretty much every night, even with the blinds closed. I'm not sensitive/discerning of that kind of stuff, but it was plain as day even to me. It was only my sister finally moved out of our next house and we cleaned out her room that it all ended. Whatever it was tied to my sister in any sort of disorder/uncleanliness. When I was a young kid, me and my friends were big into ghosts, the paranormal, the occult, or anything else creepy. I was a self-identifying witch and we would often go ghost hunting in local places. We even came up with a theory that our school used to be an ancient, cursed burial ground. The thing we loved most was Ouija boards, which is where this story begins. One day, my friend comes up to me and tells me about an experience he had. He had made a makeshift Ouija board and used it on his school bus. He had contacted a ghost that called itself and it was trying to warn us about something. Me and my other friend were curious, and wanted to know more. I had recently gotten an actual Ouija board for Christmas, and I suggested that we should have a proper session at my house. So we all come over one day and set things up, salt circle, candles, and lavender as a substitute for sage. We start the session, and things go wrong immediately. The board is saying weird and cryptic things, so we ask its name. The ghost goes by T. We ask what it is, and it just says proxy. A quick Google search of the word made us realize that T was a proxy for something a lot darker. Us being kids, we thought it was the Ouija board demon whose name started with a Z, but now I'm a little unsure exactly what it was proxying for. Suddenly, we heard a loud noise coming from the closet. My friends went over to look, and I stayed back to not take my fingers off the planchette and accidentally end the session without saying goodbye. They both screamed and ran out. They both claimed they saw a long, black shadow white thing with tiny white eyes, curled up in the fetal position on the closet floor. We all freak out and end the session right there. I knew we had holy water in the other room, so we went to go get it. While we do, we hear another noise. We rushed back, and found that the planchette, which we had taken off the board, was back on the board by itself, and all our other items were scattered around the board. We blessed the board right then and there. We talked to our ghosts a few more times, both T and A. We figured out that A comes in darkness and T comes in light, so if we wanted to talk to one or the other, we'd just turn the lights on and off. But here's the freaky part. T told my friends that he wanted to drain them of their essence, and that he was connected to their families. A told us that he was also connected, but was there to protect them. We saw the black shadow figure a few more times, most often outside our windows, watching from the street. We thought it was T. We also saw a white figure with black eyes a few times, which we thought was A. I also could not go into the basement closet without getting a terrible sense of dread. Eventually, we get the house smudged and the siding stopped completely. Now, I'm a proper Wiccan and have resolved to myself to never use a Ouija board again. TL, Doctor, dumb kids into the supernatural accidentally summon ghosts trying to drain them of their spiritual energy. I was into witchcraft for a little while in high school. I was a white witch, or at least trying to be, and I got really into tarot cards. Being a dumb teenager, I didn't know how to properly use them, and instead of using them as an extension of my subconscious, I instead thought of them as their own entity. I would speak to them as if they were their own person. I never got good readings from them. After a while of using them, I would have a feeling of something watching me around my house, especially at night. It would follow me around the house and would be in my closet when I would go to bed. The feeling of anxiety and dread that I felt kept getting worse and worse to the point where I wouldn't sleep at night. At some point I stopped practicing and it didn't go away. It would take a solid few months until it stopped. After it stopped, I went to look for my cards and my crystals. I could not find them. To this day, 5 years later, I still have no idea what happened to them. I have no doubt in my mind that whatever was following me had something to do with it. TBH, when I go to my parents' house even now I still feel like it's watching me, but it's not as intense as before. Both my husband and I have family members who have a little magic. 1. I was staying with my grandma so she could help me with the baby. I had a bad toothache, and waiting for my appointment. Up late with pain trying to be quiet so I don't wake anyone. My 2-year-old calls for me, I bend over the playpen and she puts her tinny hand on my cheek and said poor mama. That instant the pain was gone. 2. I was helping my cousin move into his first apartment. When I pulled into the parking lot my daughter looked up from her dolls, said monsters live there. She spent the day talking to her friends from behind the curtain. I didn't tell my cousin about the monsters. He moved out after 20 days. 3. When I was 20 I had a detailed dream that I was talking to a little girl. We have to save him who? I asked. She looks over the side of the raft and in the black oily water a baby boy is floating. I pick him up and hold him in my lap. The girl smiles and tells me I'm glad we picked you. 3 years later I have a daughter and a newborn son who look just like the kids in my dream. 4. When I was 13 my future sister-in-law spent the night. We were up late and noticed the corners of my room getting darker. It kept closing in and we got scared. We went down to the living room and sat close to each other. That is when we saw the large rotten fox walking on its hind legs outside the picture window. It looked at us for a long time before it walked away. I have a lot more. Safe to say I believe in the possibility of a world just outside of notice. There have been a couple of things in my life. One day when I was 2 to 3 my mom returned home and called out to me. She didn't receive an answer so she looked for me through the house and when she found me she kept calling my name but I wouldn't respond. When she shook me, I said hi and she asked why I didn't respond. I said that wasn't my name and that she wasn't my real mom. She was confused and said what do you mean? Apparently I said that she wasn't my real mom and have another name that I can't remember as well as saying my real parents are on their way to get me. My mom asked where they are? To which I responded oh they died in a car crash in Mexico but they're on their way. However the next second I went back to normal. The next thing would be throughout my childhood I sporadically had night terrors where I would wake up screaming and running through the house. But there was a period where I had these every night. So one day my grandma got a gold cross and placed it by my door of my room. I stopped having them for years. I have always been afraid of the dark, and even now I need noise and my TV on to fall asleep. If the TV stops making noise I being half asleep will put something on. This is because when I was 14 to 18 in the moments where I would be in my dimly lit room with no noise or when I would be in pitch black, I would see these two figures in the corner of my room. A tall thin man and short, skinny goblin-like woman. I would of course ignore them but I would start to hear them taunt me. I know you see us. I know you know we're here. I would continue to ignore them because I always felt that if I acknowledged them aloud, it would be a step for them and invite further stunts or whatever. When I was in the pitch black though it was different. I would feel them move toward me and the goblin woman's voice would bounce around my room. But trying to go to sleep and closing my eyes would further terrify me because I felt them inches from my face. So before I would open them, I would reach for my light. You remember that cross my grandma put? Well, one night when I was 19, I saw that it no longer upright, but was hanging upside down. I had no idea how long it's been like that but I immediately took it down and just placed it on my dresser. Haven't seen the two since, but I'm never in complete silence or darkness to find out. I was about 13 and my grandma was a believer in spirits, witches, etc. Well, I had just pissed her off and she told me I was going to pay. That night I woke up at about 3 in the morning and I saw a little kid with a green shirt on in my room. He stared at me for about a minute and I couldn't look away. He then ran out of my room straight through the door laughing. About 30 minutes later another figure appeared in my room who looked about 15. He just stared at me and mumbled something and no matter how hard I tried I couldn't talk, scream, or move, I could only look. He then vanished into seemingly thin air. The next night I woke up at about the same time and it sounded as if there were 50 people in my room screaming at me to kill myself, kill my family, and just a lot of negative thoughts in general. The next day I got anointed and it stopped. Later that day I had to see my grandma and I instantly started to get sick after I hugged her and she just sat there with a smirk on her face. I then got anointed again and it stopped. I still can't explain how she did it but I still to this day am afraid to make my grandma mad. I still have no explanation for this, so may as well put it here. There was an incident that happened with my aunt in the summer of 2013. Some of my family decided to have a sleepover at my uncle's house on Christmas Eve, so it was me, my family, my cousins and their parents, and 2 more of my aunts staying over. We were all awake well past midnight, and my mom called me to the room she was sharing with 2 of my aunts. One was her sister and the other her brother's wife. My uncle's wife had gone to sleep already, and while I was talking with my mom and my aunt, she suddenly sat bolt upright, eyes wide, staring at nothing. She didn't respond to any one of us asking if she was alright, and after a few minutes she finally looked around towards the three of us in the room. She hadn't blinked at all during that time, her eyes were still wide, and she started shouting things at us that no one could understand in the moment or even after it. Her body was also stock still, held the same way that it was when she first sat up. My mom sent me out of the room to call my uncles, then told me to go to the room where my brothers and cousins were and wait there afterwards. We could all hear my uncles praying over her, shouting even louder than she was, and she responded with a long, painful screaming. It all eventually died out after close to 20 minutes. Everyone who was there agrees that she must have been possessed that night, and even though I'm not a religious person, I still can't find a reason to say otherwise. The last apartment I lived in was me and 3 friends living together. The first 8 months in the apartment everything was normal. Then there was 1 week where weird shit started to happen. All of us got this really bad cold at the same time. The sickness would cause me to wake up every morning with such bad vertigo that I would throw up. Items in the apartment would go missing and turn up in a completely different part of the apartment. Like the TV remote would go missing and then someone would find it in a kitchen cupboard, and every time this happened no one remembered moving it / knew they wouldn't have moved X object into Y location. Our oven stopped working properly. And I would wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that there was a presence hovering over my bed watching me. I followed all of the advice that my superstitious friends gave me. I covered all the mirrors in my room before going to bed, and I woke up one night and felt the presence of the ghost in my room and yelled at her to leave me alone. Anyway, after about 2 weeks of all of us feeling like we were losing our minds, roommate number 3 ended telling the new guy she was dating about the weird supernatural stuff. Guy took it very seriously, and then went to confront his ex-GF. It turns out his ex-GF was a Wiccan, and one of the Wiccans who doesn't have a problem doing black magic, I guess, and she was super jealous that this guy was dating someone new. So the ex-GF had put a curse on roommate number 3, and that's why our apartment had become haunted. I guess the guy said something to convince his ex that the way she was reacting was not fair, and got her to lift the curse and our apartment immediately went back to normal. I rented a house a few years back and never believed in paranormal or any sort of spirits etc. My first week in the house was fine, a few creaks here and there, but nothing major. I very soon started to feel like I was being watched or just a presence in general. The third week I started waking up in the middle of the night with large scratches, almost cuts going the length of my arm. From my wrist to my armpit 3 scratches all parallel. Always on my right arm. I didn't think much of it. One night I hear a loud bang, go to the back and notice my back door was open. Okay, no worries, I shut and locked the door with a deadbolt. Next morning I wake up and the door wide open, but the freaky part, the deadbolt is still in the locked position as well as the knob. It really starts to freak me out now. I start telling a person I work with about this stuff. He told me his sister was a Native American shaman priestess whatever it was, and she would come sage bless my house if I wanted. The next week she came over with, I believe it was called sweetgrass and sage. She burned the sage walking around and told me can definitely feel a presence in the house. She hung the sweetgrass over my bed, and ever since I haven't had anything strange happen. Very strange. I actively practice witchcraft, and honestly the more you dive into the occult / spiritual practices, your line between strange and normal gets really blurry. However, some of my most interesting experiences occurred while doing energy readings for other people. The way I read is by focusing on a person and on their energy, and I will see a sort of vision from them. I've seen a naked woman being crowned by hands of shadow, with serpents sitting at her feet like guard dogs. I've seen an extremely detailed / intricate dagger on a pedestal in an underground chamber, awaiting its next ritual. Most recently I saw a teenage boy on a tall metal structure, preparing to leap over the edge and fly. I've also done something referred to as diving, which is a deep meditation meant to explore your own energy system or soul. You see all kinds of bizarre things when you start exploring yourself so intimately. I just remembered something else that's a little more relatable, I guess. I'm solitary, so when I decided to really focus on my craft I did a self-initiation ritual. I set up outside, got my circle ready, the sun was shining beautifully, it was a gorgeous day. Right when I was speaking the last line of the ritual and finishing up, it started pouring, raining hard. It wasn't cloudy or sprinkling, there was no transition, it was sunny one moment and the next it was raining so hard I couldn't see 5 feet in front of me. My ritual space was maybe 50 feet away from my house, and I was soaked through all my clothes by the time I reached the door. And this could just be the mood I was in or the energy, but when I was hit by that rain, I just felt this immediate euphoria. It was one of the most incredible feelings I've ever experienced in my life.
Thanks for watching. Please do like, share, comment and subscribe for more videos.